Welcome. First, thank you for joining with us today. Florida is stronger together, and we believe today will be a positive step toward informing and educating each of us as we bind together to fight hate. My name is Randon Carvel, and I am the president of the Jewish Federation of Sarasota-Manatee. On behalf of our federation, I want to thank the following partners for planning today's program. Jeffrey Feld, Jewish Federation of Greater Naples. Alan Isaacs, Jewish Federation of Lee and Charlotte Counties. Howard Tevlowitz and Kim Adler, Jewish Federation of Sarasota-Manatee. Gary Gould and Mark Siegel, Tampa Jewish Community Centers and Federation. Maxine Kaufman, Jewish Federation of the Florida's Gulf Coast. Keith Dvorchik, Jewish Federation of Greater Orlando. Brian Lipton, Director, American Jewish Committee, West Coast of Florida, and Yael Hirschfeld, Interim Regional Director of the Anti-Defamation League. Today's goal is twofold. One, you will hear from our elected officials on the local, state, and federal levels of government. And we will be sharing with you how you can take concrete action. We have a variety of speakers live and in video form, and Governor Ron DeSantis will be joining us live at 4:45 today. The importance of having Governor DeSantis live with us today cannot be overstated, since he represents the state with the third largest concentration of Jewish citizens. The rise of anti-Semitism around the world and in the United States has been well documented over the last several years, including a recent FBI report indicating that the greatest amount of hate crimes are directed against Jews. There has been an 80% increase in reported anti-Semitic activities in the United States during this past month alone. While there are some who will conflate this with the situation in Israel, recent terrorist attacks by Hamas against Israeli civilians, and Israel's right as a sovereign nation to defend itself against such attacks, the reality is that the conflict is only an excuse for centuries-old anti-Semitism. In order to save time and hear from our speakers, their bios and their email addresses will be sent to all participants in a follow-up email along with today's recording. We will begin with David Harris, CEO of the American Jewish Committee, AJC. As David will tell us, we must say no to anti-Semitism, have zero tolerance for anti-Semitism, and demand that our government work together to fight anti-Semitism. We are in this as one, and silence cannot be the answer.
Good afternoon. My name is David Harris. I'm CEO of American Jewish Committee. It's an honor to share this stage, if you will, together with Governor DeSantis, Congressman Buchanan, and state and local officials, joined by members of the Jewish community, including my cherished colleague, Brian Lipton, and friends of the Jewish community. Normally, I love speaking with Floridians, but not on this occasion. I wish there were no reason for this occasion, but obviously there is. My own family, my mother, my father, and my wife all came to this country fleeing anti-Semitism. In the case of my mother, first the anti-Semitism of communism, and then the anti-Semitism of Nazism. In the case of my father, the anti-Semitism of Nazism. And in the case of my wife, the anti-Semitism of jihadism. They saw in this blessed country a refuge, a new start, a home for the Jewish community. In recent weeks in particular, we have seen a surge in anti-Semitism in this country. We've seen Jews attacked for the simple reason of being Jews. We've seen it in restaurants, we've seen it on the street, we've seen it against synagogues, and we've seen it elsewhere. And we have to say collectively, no, we will not accept this anti-Semitism. This is not our America. Now people ask, what can be done? And obviously that's the single most important question. What can we do about it? Well, we've gathered today to express our collective outrage, and that's one important step. Silence is never the answer, but there's more we have to do. We have to count on our political leaders, and that's why it's so particularly important that several have joined this gathering today and insist that our political leaders not only stand up and speak out against anti-Semitism, but are with us the next day and the day after. Because we know all too well that anti-Semitism is a resilient pathology that has survived thousands of years in multiple mutations. And if we're going to address it and confront it, it has to be in a sustained manner, and we count on political leaders to lead the way. Number two, we have to be swivel-headed. We at American Jewish Committee have been saying this now for over 2 decades, as we first saw the resurgence of anti-Semitism in Europe, and then as it crossed the Atlantic Ocean to this country. Anti-Semitism has multiple sources. No one who's serious about combating anti-Semitism should try and weaponize it or instrumentalize it for partisan political purposes. We've seen anti-Semitism come from the far right. We saw its manifestations in Charlottesville, in Pittsburgh, in Holloway, and among some on January the 6th. We've also seen anti-Semitism come from the far left, and that is as pernicious as the anti-Semitism of the far right. And when we've seen anti-Israel, pro-Hamas supporters, whether in New York or Los Angeles or points in between, targeting Jews as Jews and assuming that because they are Jews, they are extensions of the state of Israel, we have to say no to that form of anti-Semitism as to every other. We must be swivel-headed and call them all out as they deserve to be called out. And we have to tell our political parties as well, there's no room for anti-Semites, not to mention anti-Semitism, in either political party, no matter what the guise may be. And as we meet now on both sides of the aisle in the United States Congress, there are people who are anti-Semites. Moreover, we have to turn to our partners across the ethnic, religious, and racial spectrum of the United States and say, just as we, the Jewish community, have been there to fight hatred and racism and xenophobia in all of its forms over so many years, and AJC is a very good example of exactly that kind of voice. Now we count on you to stand with us as we have stood with you. Because anti-Semitism is a cancer, and left unchecked, anti-Semitism will metastasize and affect not only Jews, but all minorities, and ultimately the very fabric and fiber of the pluralism that is so special and important to this country. And finally, we have to demand of our institutions, our schools, our universities, and other institutions that are also there to defend the core values of this country. There can be zero tolerance for anti-Semitism. Our children, whether in high schools or colleges or elsewhere, cannot be exposed to anti-Semitism while others look away, downplay it, or simply pretend it doesn't exist. We have to demand of those institutions accountability. We have to demand moral courage and clarity as well. So this is a time for us not only to express our outrage as we are today, not only to thank those leaders who are joining us today, but also to launch from today, going forward, whether in Florida or elsewhere, a national, sustained, determined movement animated by outrage that says no to anti-Semitism in any and all of its forms. No to hatred, bigotry, and racism in any or all of its forms. We're in this together, and let's be clear, the very future of our country hangs in the balance. Silence cannot, must not ever be the answer.
Those powerful words from David Harris set the tone for what we will hear from our speakers today. And I'm told there are over 1,200 of you joining us in this town hall. That's amazing. Thanks to each of you for making this a priority and for attending. Now, let's hear a message from Senator Marco Rubio.
Hi, this is Marco Rubio, and I'm very sorry I can't be with you in person today as the Jewish Federation of Sarasota-Manatee is organizing your first ever anti-Semitism forum and a night to speak against anti-Semitism. It's an ancient evil. It's one that has reared its head over and over again throughout human history. It did so in the 1940s and the late 30s with a catastrophic impact in which the murder of human beings, of over 6 million human beings, was industrialized. But it reminds us that it's an evil that continues, and it takes on different forms and different shapes. Increasingly, it takes on the shape of being anti-Israel, anti-Jewish state, and it manifests itself in the foreign policy of countries. So whether it's somebody spray painting hateful messages on the side of a building, or some of the rhetoric we hear domestically or internationally, it's incumbent upon all of us to call it out for what it is and to do all we can so that never again those in power will be those who share these views of anti-Semitism. Thank you for this event today. Noah, we're with you always, 100% of the way. On every issue, our voice will continue to be a loud one.
Next, words from Congressman Vern Buchanan, who represents parts of Manatee, Sarasota, and parts of Hillsborough counties, and who has been a true friend to our people.
The Jewish community has experienced a disturbing and dramatic rise in anti-Semitism. That is why I was pleased to see Congress pass and the President sign the No Hate Act into law. I helped author that bill to create incentives for local law enforcement to immediately report potential hate crimes to the FBI. Violence against the Jewish people has no place in our country. As a member of the bipartisan task force to eliminate anti-Semitism, I am committed to combating the evil ideology.
Well, we're certainly deeply grateful for Vern's support. And now it's a pleasure to introduce Chief Anthony Holloway, Police Chief for St. Petersburg, Florida. And as you may know, the Holocaust Museum in that community experienced anti-Semitic acts of hatred recently. Welcome, Chief Holloway.
Thank you for having me here, and good afternoon. I am Chief Tony Holloway with the St. Pete Police Department. On May the 27th, the Florida Holocaust Museum was vandalized by a person or group with anti-Semitic, racially biased graffiti. Detectives are now reviewing all the cameras in the area. We're working with our local, state, and federal partners to investigate this crime. This is not a joke, and it should not and will not be tolerated in our city, in our state, or in our country. But we need the assistance of our community to help us find those responsible for this hateful act. So I would say, if you see something, say something, and now let's do something about this. So you need to contact the St. Pete Police Department. You can do that by texting us at SPPD 847-411, or you can call us at 727-893-7780 with any information that can help us hold those accountable. We want to let these vandals know that this will not be tolerated, that this type of crime will not be tolerated in our city, in our state, and in our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Holloway, for joining us today, and of course, especially for all of your support and efforts. Next, we will hear from Florida's State Attorney, Andrew Warren.
Good afternoon. It's a privilege to be here and to share this virtual stage with other elected officials. I was asked to talk for a few minutes about fighting anti-Semitism and prejudice in my experience as state attorney. But candidly, my feelings on the subject are formed not so much by my experience as a prosecutor, but as a Jewish American, a citizen, a father, an elected leader. It was 35 years ago, but I vividly remember being just a boy and going to high holiday services in Gainesville to see that swastikas had been painted on the walls of the synagogue. I can still feel that fear and insecurity. It was a similar feeling I had around the same age at a rest stop on the Florida Turnpike, when standing in line next to my father and me was a neo-Nazi in full attire. I remember wondering and worrying, Did he know that we were Jewish? What would he do? Could my father protect me? After high school, I went to Poland to visit concentration camps, and I can still feel the fear from skinheads in Krakow shouting obscenities at our group as we entered a Jewish cemetery. I can clearly picture the camps: Majdanek, Sobibor, Treblinka, Auschwitz, where I stood, how I felt, why I cried. Being inside barracks filled to the rafters with tiny shoes of murdered children, the smell of charred bodies that still poison the air. For 25 years, I've kept a rock on my shelf that I picked up from the death camp of Birkenau as a reminder that unlike 6 million of my ancestors, I chose to walk in, and I had the freedom and luxury to walk out. Years later, those feelings resurfaced in fatherhood. My 10-year-old has been learning about the Holocaust, and she asks whether anti-Semitism still exists. And when I answer her, I feel the anguish that many of us know when you have to admit to your child that, yes, it does. And inevitably, she asks, with that same fear and uncertainty in her eyes, whether it can happen again, and do we need to worry? I assure her that we don't, because we live in the United States and this country is different. The people are different. Our government is different, that it will not happen again because we won't let it happen again. And she accepts those answers and breathes a sigh of relief. But she doesn't know enough history to point out the same could have been said about European Jewry before Nazism. She doesn't know enough to ask about the rising tide of anti-Semitism in this country. She doesn't know that we are here today precisely because it is a concern. But we know better. The Holocaust didn't happen overnight. The possibility existed because of the cancer of anti-Semitism that has lingered and spread throughout history, exploited by evil men and condoned by the silent masses. So here we are again. This is not just a critical issue in our country at this moment. It is a critical issue at every moment. As it's been said, anti-Semitism is the godfather of racism and the gateway to tyranny, fascism, and war. It is to be regarded not as the enemy of the Jewish people, but as the common enemy of humanity and of civilization. To fight bigotry and prejudice is to fight for the soul of our country. Throughout history, religious and racial minorities have been oppressed, persecuted, enslaved, and murdered, from Egypt to the Inquisition to the Holocaust. But America is supposed to be different. We are a beacon of light and freedom and tolerance in the world, not because of divine intervention, but because of human action. Our commitment to freedom of religion, freedom from oppression, freedom for all Americans, and our commitment to fight for those freedoms. During the Yizkor service at Yom Kippur, we ask God to remember the souls of the martyrs, the innocent who were slaughtered and strangled and burned for their Judaism. In their memory, we pledge tzedakah to repair the world. We ask that their bravery, dedication, and sacrifice be reflected in our lives. We must bear witness. We must never be silent. We are the eyes that remember. We are the voice that cries out. And that is why we must be vigilant today. Vigilant in denouncing anti-Semitic political speech. Republicans must denounce anti-Semitism camouflaged by radical strains of populism and patriotism. Democrats must denounce anti-Semitism masquerading as cultural wokeness. We must be vigilant in denouncing those who refuse to denounce prejudice. We must be vigilant in denouncing prejudice in all forms, in all places. At political rallies, on college campuses, on social media. Lastly, as we say every Shabbat in a prayer for our nation, we must rededicate ourselves to forging a common bond in true harmony between all religions, between all races, to banish all hatred and bigotry, and to safeguard the ideals which are the pride and glory of our country. We have pledged to never forget, but we still need to be reminded, as we were taught as children, and as a generation later, how we teach our children. This is how we repair the world. Thank you and shalom.
State Attorney Warren, thank you so much for those powerful words. And thank you equally for all your hard work and your support. It's greatly appreciated. Up next on the agenda is Congressman Bilirakis, who represents Northern Hillsborough and Pasco counties.
Hello, I'm Congressman Gus Bilirakis, and I represent the 12th Congressional District of Florida, the Tampa Bay area. And I want to thank the Jewish Federation of Central and Southwest Florida for the opportunity to share my thoughts with you today. I wish I could be there in person, but I have a subcommittee hearing this afternoon, and I'm sure you understand. So hopefully next year I can be there in person. On June 5th, 2019, almost exactly 2 years ago, as the co-chair of the International Religious Freedom Caucus, I hosted a briefing on the rise of global anti-Semitism. Sadly, we are still marking the rise of anti-Semitism. It is important that more elected officials at every level of government address this scourge. Hate and hate groups have no place in our society. The fact that anti-Semitic attacks are on the rise in the United States, a nation founded on the principles of freedom, liberty, and justice, is alarming and wholly unacceptable. Just yesterday, we commemorated the 77th anniversary of D-Day. It's important we remember the sacrifice of the millions of men and women who fought to liberate Europe from Nazism. There is no starker reminder of what can happen when people stand by while hate and intolerance grow. The hesitation of the international community to act enabled the conditions for the Holocaust, where 6 million Jews were exterminated. While the world learned a grave lesson and swore, never forget, never again, Holocaust denial is on the rise. We can not forget, and I, for one, have supported congressional legislation that expands access to Holocaust and anti-hate education to teach children the important lessons of the Holocaust and the consequences of bigotry and hate. As a matter of fact, we have a museum in St. Petersburg that does a wonderful job, great staff, and I'm very proud of it, and we want to continue to support that museum. I have also been a proud member of the Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism, which is dedicated to addressing the rise of global anti-Semitism and promoting tolerance worldwide. I have traveled to Israel on several occasions and have engaged Israeli policymakers on ways the United States can better combat global anti-Semitism. The recent defacing of the Florida Holocaust Museum shows that we have fallen short and we must keep on. Hopefully, through events like this, we can raise awareness and policy considerations to ensure we do not perpetuate failures from the past. This day of action against anti-Semitism should be a lifetime of action against hate and bigotry. You can always count on me to be part of the solution. God bless you, and thanks for inviting me here today and allowing me to give remarks.
We will now hear from Congressman Byron Donald, who represents Lee and Collier counties.
Over the past few weeks, we've witnessed the escalating terror attacks by Hamas against the Israeli people. As tragic as these attacks have been, they unearthed the underbelly of anti-Semitism in the United States. While many are happy to point out the hateful actions of right-wing anti-Semites, the media and the left refuse to condemn the evil and anti-Semitic voices in their party. Whether it is neo-Nazi groups on left or leftist politicians like Ilhan Omar, the anti-Semitic rhetoric must receive universal condemnation. Throughout the recent Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I am proud to stand with my GOP colleagues and some of the very brave members of the Democrat Party in supporting our allies in Israel and against the rise in terrorism being directed towards them in the Middle East. Right outside my DC office, there is a sign every stand with Israel. Rest assured, I will always stand up for democracy, freedom, justice, and liberty, and for the nations like ours and Israel that hold these virtues near and dear to their hearts.
These have been great messages from our congressmen, and if they represent you, please reach out to them and thank them for their efforts in standing with us. Now we're going to spend the next few minutes hearing from Florida senators and representatives. From the Florida House, we're going to hear comments from Representative Fiona McFarland, who represents Sarasota County, and then Representative Ben Diamond, who represents parts of Pinellas County. Representative McFarland, please.
Thank you. And thank you so much, everyone, for logging in tonight and being a part of this discussion. I'm State Rep Fiona McFarland, and I represent Sarasota on the West Coast here. This session, I worked with our local representatives and with our governor to bring some important funding for security for the new Jewish Federation campus here in Sarasota. And, back in the beginning of session, as I filed the request, I remember thinking to myself how difficult it might be to convince my fellow legislators from around the state of the need for security funding at a cultural center. And so you see, over the past 2 years here in SOTA, we had several unfortunate incidences of defamation and graffiti at our local synagogues and temples. But then as our budget has recently been signed by our governor just in the last week, coinciding with Hamas's recent activity in Israel, inciting sympathizer activity here at home, I realized that push for security was unfortunately all too timely. Now, I'm a Navy veteran. I went to the Naval Academy, and when I was a senior there, we would bring groups of our freshman midshipmen to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., where we had discussions about what it might have looked like for a Nazi soldier to dissent from orders against Jews during World War II. And we talked about how we might someday do the same if ever put in a similar situation, and what that dissent might look like. Now, at the time, that seemed like a historical exercise. It seemed all too easy to do the right thing through the lens of retrospect. And they really seemed like thought experiments. But what I've been reflecting on lately today is that we as Americans are still facing the unfortunate truth that not all religious and cultural groups are as free as our Constitution demands. And that's incumbent upon all of us as Americans to do better. We all agree here on this call that anti-Semitism is something that should not exist in the 21st century. And many of us feel alarmed that we're even having to have this conversation tonight. Now, how do we make it better? The Jewish Federation is doing the right work by having events like tonight where us elected leaders get up and tell you how important this issue is and how seriously we take it. And they're also doing the right work by building spaces of community and culture around the state that help educate and inform the communities that they're in. It's only through sunlight and education and discussion that we can bridge this build among different peoples and different cultures. Thank you all for joining tonight. Please continue to hold your elected officials accountable if they are not saying and doing the work that America deserves. And please help us as American citizens to have those conversations with your neighbors and your friends as well. Thank you all.
Thank you, Representative McFarland. And now Representative Ben Diamond.
Well, thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be with you. I want to thank the Jewish Federations for sponsoring this important town hall. I want to thank all my colleagues for participating. Brandon, as you mentioned, my name is Ben Diamond. I'm privileged to represent St. Petersburg and Pinellas County in the Florida House. This is my home and this is my third term in office. And perhaps the greatest privilege of representing this district is that I represent the Florida Holocaust Museum. And it's a very special privilege to have the Holocaust Museum in my district. A few days ago, I was able to attend a rally that many of you were probably at if you're here in St. Pete, in response to the anti-Semitic graffiti that was spray painted on the museum about 2 weeks ago. And coming out of COVID and even though this is a virtual event, that was an in-person rally outside, and there was something very special about being able to come together as a community and speak out in one voice against the anti-Semitism and the hate that led to that act. And the diversity in the crowd was really striking. There were people of all ages, there were people of all religions, all races, all backgrounds. But we all came together outside after work to stand up against that hateful act. And I just thought I would report to this group, because there may be many people who were unable to attend that rally, a little bit about what I learned and what I've reflected on since I was there. And I shared in the chat a column I wrote about it in today's Tampa Bay Times. We heard from a Holocaust survivor, a woman named Toni Rindy, and we also heard from the president of our museum, Beth Gelman. And everybody who came to the rally brought a book. And the purpose of bringing the book, I learned, was symbolic and important. As Holocaust survivor Liesl Schick has said, there are 3 things that we can be doing to counteract prejudice and anti-Semitism and hatred. And those 3 things are education, education, and education. And Toni Rindy, who is the Holocaust survivor who lives here in Pinellas County, who I've heard speak many times, reiterated that message. And so for those of you who haven't yet visited the Florida Holocaust Museum in St. Petersburg, I urge you to come visit, because I think that the best way we can counteract what we're seeing going on right now in Florida and across the country in terms of this unfortunate rise in anti-Semitic act is for us as a Jewish community to make sure that we're educated and that we're speaking out in one voice, and for us to then be reaching out to share the mission of the Florida Holocaust Museum with our school districts and with our community, and to be supporting our museum here if we can financially. They have a terrific website, FloridaHolocaustMuseum.org, where a lot of their materials are online. And as citizens, I think we have an important opportunity and responsibility to speak out proactively. And I, of course, want to do everything I can to promote the very good work that the museum is doing in terms of education. Unfortunately, as many of the other speakers have said this afternoon, these are not isolated incidents. In fact, there were recently anti-Semitic flyers circulated in my neighborhood, as well as along iconic Beach Drive here in downtown St. Petersburg. So this is not just an academic discussion. This is a real discussion about what we can do and a call to action for us all to be involved in calling out anti-Semitism and hate wherever we see it. And so I want to thank you for organizing this very important discussion. I look forward to hearing from the rest of the panelists and my good friend, Senator Joe Gruters. So thank you, Brandon.
You bet. And thank you, Representative Diamond. And again, Representative McFarland, thanks not only for your service to our state and our communities, but really for standing together with us today, and we know in the days ahead. Now, from the state Senate side, I'd like to welcome my friend, Senator Joe Gruters, who after his own comments will introduce Governor Ron DeSantis. Welcome, Senator Gruters.
Thank you so much, Brandon. Thank you to all the Jewish federations for coming together and putting this great forum on. This town hall is incredibly important as anti-Semitism is on the rise, and it is of great concern. I'm disheartened. We have to still address anti-Semitism, but we must continue to stand up for our friends and our fellow community members. During my first Senate session in 2019, there was an abhorrent shooting on a Saturday when a hate-filled 19-year-old stormed into a Jewish synagogue and started shooting. He knew nothing about the victims other than they were Jewish, and that was enough for them to die in his own mind. 6 months prior to that day, another Jewish synagogue was stormed, and that time individuals who survived the worst human crime in the history of the world, the Holocaust, fell victim again because they were Jews. And most recently in St. Petersburg, someone branded a swastika on the Holocaust Museum. Anti-Semitism has been on the rise over the last couple of years, and it is even more evident because of the events happening in the Middle East in Israel. It was my pleasure to sponsor and support House Bill 741, which passed unanimously in the House and Senate. and signed by the governor. This bill ensured that anti-Semitism is treated in an identical manner as racism in our K-20 through 20 public education institutions for students or employees. And it also changed the definition of what anti-Semitism is. This year, while working with my fellow legislators and recently signed by the governor, I was proud to sponsor and secure over $1 million in state funding that will provide a safer environment and cultivate innovative ideas related to campus safety and wellness, promoting, and as well as promoting Israel as a business partner with Florida. Now is the time for leaders to step up to the plate and say unequivocally that they will fully defend the safety and security of Israel. No longer should the security of Israel be used as a political punchline. There are frankly some political leaders who are stoking the flames of anti-Israel and anti-Jewish sentiment. I'm happy to continue standing by this community and help where I can in passing legislation and securing funding that will promote safety relationships and will create a safer environment for Floridians to practice their religion without fear. It is my privilege to be able to introduce America's #1 governor. Governor Ron DeSantis is a great leader who supports and defends the right of the Jewish people and the state of Israel. No governor is a stronger supporter of Israel. And as a former federal representative, Congressman Ron DeSantis wrote the legislation that allowed for the transfer of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. As governor, he has ensured Florida's bonds with Israel become stronger. He sponsored the first international trade mission to Israel with enormous success. He supported school choice initiatives to include Jewish day schools, as well as funding for security. And during the pandemic, Governor DeSantis made clear that our rights guaranteed under the Constitution would be upheld and that Florida would not close any place of worship. Every measure to deter anti-Semitism in Florida will be taken under the leadership of Governor DeSantis. It is my privilege to introduce America's greatest governor, Ron DeSantis.
Well, thanks, Senator. Really appreciate it. Thank you all for having me. It's interesting. We did the trade mission to Israel my first year in office, and we've recently been dealing with, we did a whole bunch of stuff, academic engagement, business engagement. I mean, it was really an incredible trip. So we're dealing with different issues regarding Lake Okeechobee. We have algae blooms. We're concerned about how the Army Corps of Engineers may discharge water in our estuaries. And so I'm working with the Department of Environmental Protection. I said, we've got to be proactive. If this algae, if they do this, what can we do? What do we have? And it turns out we have relationships now with various companies, including an innovative tech company in Israel who has solutions for this blue-green algae. So we actually had this happening in one of the canals. These guys were out there, they're applying all this, biodegradable, it's working. So I was able to go out down in Southwest Florida a couple of weeks ago and see that firsthand, but it just shows, the relationship. We're over there, we're doing this. We have Israeli companies that are actually helping Florida meet some of the needs. And so we really appreciate the relationship that we have. Joe mentioned the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. That was something that we worked really hard on in Congress, and we're able to get that done under President Trump. And I was there when they actually opened the embassy, which is a really incredible experience. We knew when I first became governor, and of course we see now, we have to deal with anti-Semitism that I think if you look back 20 years ago, anti-Semitism is worse today than it was, which is really incredible that we would be seeing that. And I think the best way to do it from a position in elected office is we got to go on offense against anti-Semitism. I think we've done a good job of doing that in conjunction with the Florida legislature. My first year in office, we signed the anti-Semitism bill into law. Actually, when we were in Jerusalem, that basically says, anti-Semitism is akin to how we would treat racism. It has no place in our academic institutions, not just K through 12, but also higher education. And we thought that that was very important and send a strong message. Also, when I first came into office, you had Airbnb that was engaging in activities that violated Florida's BDS law. We spoke out on that immediately. We added them to our list of companies that had run afoul of Florida anti-discrimination law. And sure enough, very shortly after that, Airbnb reversed the policy that unfairly targeted Jews. I think when you look to see some of the things that are happening in Israel, the demonization of Israel really feeds anti-Semitism. I'm very pro-Israel. I have great relationships over there. I'm proud of that. Same time, you don't have to support, have a good relationship. It's fine. If you criticize Israeli policy, that's all fair game. But when they are singled out for disfavored treatment over countries that are committing untold atrocities, and yet Israel, say, the #1 country that's getting sanctioned by the United Nations over and over again, when they're held to a different standard and singled out like that, that does feed anti-Semitism. And so we've been very strong in saying Israel has a right to defend itself. And if these international institutions are singling them out and applying a different standard to the world's only Jewish democracy, then we are saying, yes, that is anti-Semitic to apply a separate standard in that way. We also believe that it's very important that we have very strong Holocaust education in our K through 12 schools throughout the state of Florida. I signed a bill in 2019-2020 year, making sure that school districts have Holocaust instruction that is accurate and that is telling the accurate story. We cannot have people try to whitewash the Holocaust in Florida schools. We're just not going to put taxpayer dollars to that. Very important that that story is told. We're also proud of what we've been able to do to support safety at Jewish day schools. We did another $4 million in this year's budget to support security at Florida's Jewish day schools. We also did hundreds of thousands of dollars to different types of Holocaust remembrance, either memorials or task force. And we think that that's something that's very, very important. So Florida, I think, regardless, almost everybody, regardless of party, I think is united to say, we have no tolerance for this anti-Semitic behavior. When I hear these stories about people, when you see some of this stuff happening with Hamas, that somebody who's Jewish just walking down the street and is getting attacked or accosted. Certainly in other parts of the country, I've had some really, really bad stuff. And then we've seen some of this nasty stuff in Florida. I think we all just need to speak with one voice and say that this is not something that's going to be tolerated here. We are going to stand with our Jewish brothers and sisters, and we are absolutely going to stand strong in support of the Florida-Israel relationship. And as governor, I'm going to defend Israel's rights to keep their citizens safe against terrorist attacks. And so I want to thank all the legislators who've worked really hard on a lot of great legislation over the last many years. I know as more issues come down the pike, we'll be there, but we really feel like from BDS to Holocaust education to fighting anti-Semitism, we really feel in Florida that when these issues present themselves, the legislature steps up and we're able to sign some very good bills into law and also have good budget support for things like security, Jewish day schools, and of some of our synagogues. So thank you all, and God bless everybody.
Thank you, Governor DeSantis, not only for your words of support regarding anti-Semitism, but for forging good relationships between our state and Israel. We're grateful for that work as well. And with all your challenges and responsibilities statewide, we are truly grateful that you were able to spend some time with us today.
Absolutely.
Thank
God
you
bless
again.
you guys. Thanks.
Take care. Thank you. Well, we have heard some terrific comments from our representatives. It is comforting to know that our government leaders are hard at work doing all they can to prevent and fight against anti-Semitism. But there's more that we can do for ourselves. As we have mentioned in the chat, we encourage you to visit www.actagainst.org. Let me repeat that, www.actagainstantisemitism.org. There you will find some resources you can use to fight anti-Semitism, especially a social media toolkit. We hope you will use the graphics and copy found in the toolkit to show your circle of friends that you will not remain silent. Hate must be exposed and denounced. Get involved, sign petitions, stand up and speak up. Acceptance, because bias is learned early and then usually at home. Expose your children to multicultural experiences and include their non-Jewish friends too. You might want to invite non-Jewish guests to your Shabbat dinner table or a Jewish holiday celebration. Let them see what it means to be Jewish. But educate yourself and research as well. Our agendas are. Being informed improves. You also dig a little deeper. Look inside ourselves for biases and stereotypes. We all have biases, but acknowledgement is the first step to better understanding. This is a reminder that you are the eyes and ears of the Jewish community. Be sure to report any acts of anti-Semitism to your security officers, as well as your local law enforcement. We will continue to make our voices heard and fight anti-Semitism wherever and whenever it shows up. And as we saw this afternoon, our government officials are listening to us. Let's keep it up. I leave you with the quotation from Reverend Martin Niemöller, who was a witness to the Holocaust and whose words are on permanent display at the United States Holocaust Museum. His words say this: "First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. And then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. So I ask all of you who can hear my words, please speak out. Thank you again for joining us today. We leave you with words from across the country. This video was from the recent day of Action Against Anti-Semitism. Enjoy it, have a good evening, and stay well."
Thank you for joining us today for this Day of Action Against Anti-Semitism.
We are steadfast in our commitment to fight anti-Jewish hate wherever and whenever it happens.
We have to implore everybody to speak out against anti-Semitism, against racism.
It's time for all of us to stand up against anti-Semitism.
I stand in solidarity with the Jewish community and anybody else who believes that we must speak out against anti-Semitism.
Together with our colleagues at Hadassah, JFNA, ADL, and the Orthodox Union, we're pleased and proud to host this National Action Day Against Anti-Semitism.
And today, we want to make sure that we are clear that anti-Semitism has no place in America.
It is my honor to bring you greetings from President Biden, who stands with you against the scourge of anti-Semitism, now and always.
We have to stand up against anti-Semitism and against hatred for all people, Jews included, non-Jews included.
As a Muslim, as a human being, I am incredibly pained and saddened by the most recent wave of anti-Semitic attacks in this country and around the world.
And that anti-Semitism is often used as the fuel for Islamophobia, for racism, for anti-immigrant fear-mongering and conspiracy theories, such as the deep state, such as the replacement theory.
Hate is unacceptable, inaction inexcusable. We must act against anti-Semitism.
This hatred is horrific and heartbreaking. We must not hesitate to call it for what it is, anti-Semitism.
These attacks must be combated whether they come from the left or the right or anywhere in between.
Right here in our own country, American Jews are being subjected to more violence, more vandalism, and more harassment.
Social media is polluted with anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, and white supremacist groups who use it to recruit and inspire violence.
Everyone in a leadership position in the country has a responsibility to confront this ugliness firmly and forcefully.
It's an honor to speak with you all today as we're joined virtually by thousands of Americans, Jewish and non-Jewish, to stand in solidarity against anti-Semitism.
I promise I will work with President Biden, Congress, and with all of you to promote policies that will create a fairer, more tolerant, more prosperous country.
I come on behalf of Bright Star Church, along with many African-American leaders and community constituents, to say that we stand with you against all anti-Semitism and hatred.
There is no room for hate in an inclusive America.
and we strongly condemn this targeted violence against members of the Jewish community.
It is critical that all of us who are opposed to hate forcefully, unequivocally, and with clarity condemn these attacks.
Indifference is our enemy, and we Catholics cannot be indifferent to the suffering and the anguish of our Jewish brothers and sisters.
We say no to hate. We say yes to building a nation of multicultural respect, multi-religious understanding, and a sense that equal opportunity and equity guide our future.